presidential hopeful makes a campaign trip to South Dakota looking for support next on KDLT News.
And now, 5 News at 10. Your news tonight with Sherry Kurtz and Ben Boyette.
Good evening again, and thanks for joining us. The death toll tonight in the continuing search through rubble of what used to be the Oklahoma City Federal Office Building is now at 52.
The search was slow going today and stalled for a time for reinforcement of the wreckage of the 9-story structure. The FBI today released sketches of 2 men wanted for questioning. The 2 reportedly rented a truck that possibly carried a half-ton of explosives that blew up the building yesterday morning. The FBI says it has many good leads with good substance, but no arrests yet. Tonight, a 3rd man wanted for questioning returned to Washington aboard a British Airways jet. He was detained in London while en route to Rome. And tonight also, 3 police officers were shot in Haddon Heights, New Jersey. At least 1, possibly all 3, died during a confrontation with a suspected child abuser. The 2 police officers and a prosecutor's investigator was shot allegedly by a man barricaded inside a house. The shooting happened as the officers tried to search the suspect's home for weapons. The police earlier received a report that a 3-year-old living in the house was sexually abused.
The bombing of that federal building in Oklahoma City forced federal officials around the country to reevaluate security measures. Those extra steps are even in place in South Dakota's federal courthouses. Cammie Melton tonight talks with people at the federal courthouse in Sioux Falls about the changes.
It was a blast like no other this country has ever seen. An estimated 2,000-pound high-powered explosive blew a 30-foot crater in the ground and turned part of this federal office building into a heap of debris and concrete tomb. And this isn't in New York or D.C., but central USA.
It makes you realize that if these things can happen in a fairly small city such as Oklahoma City, certainly it could happen anywhere else.
And for that reason, federal courthouses across the country, South Dakota included, have been ordered to be on at least a heightened level of protection. Security at the federal courts building in Sioux Falls has included surveillance cameras, metal detectors, and security officers for the last 10 years. But this increased level of awareness has never been here.
Paying a lot closer attention to people coming in, what they're carrying with them.
And even after the devastating explosion yesterday, workers here feel that's enough.
A little concern for everyone in Oklahoma City, I think probably most. Not a lot of concern about my own safety because I feel that the Marshal Service here does a real fine job of watching out for all of us here.
We feel safe out here and we don't think it can happen to us, but it has gotten a lot closer than we ever thought it would. So people are a little leery today, and rightfully so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there are. Even my daughter was concerned, and I can understand why.
And like in Oklahoma City, U.S. Marshal officials here say there's nothing they could do to prevent a similar explosion in the future. And that's because the bomb that exploded in Oklahoma City was inside a car parked in a public parking spot right in front of the federal offices building. So all federal workers can do now is join the rest of the country in waiting for answers to this senseless destruction as 2 more search and rescue crews move in to continue the search for bodies that could take up to 6 days. In Sioux Falls, Cammie Melton, KDLT News.
One of the so far top contenders for the Republican nomination for president, Texas Senator Phil Gramm, told us today he expects to win the South Dakota primary next year. Gramm, who says he...
a spark, and that spark is what leads to the lightning channel that forms at the base of the cloud and then extends down to the ground. So relatively simple. If you can get a positive charge in the upper part of the cloud, negative in the bottom, and you can form lightning. That does often occur. And if you are in the way of lightning, if you're indoors, you should always avoid telephones, all electrical appliances. Don't shower during a storm. Anytime you're messing with water during lightning, you are prone to being struck. Stay away from all windows, and of course, if you're outdoors, don't be near the tallest object. That's been known for many years that you don't want to be near trees, anything metal at all, because it certainly can get struck by lightning. And don't play with any type of softball equipment like metal bats, and also, of course, those golf clubs aren't the most susceptible. Many people get struck every year on golf courses. Don't go near water, and please, always try to avoid lightning, avoid going outside if there's any way possible when there is a lightning storm. On the satellite vantage point, we have clouds that are sticking around even
Chamberlain, Fort Thompson, and out farther west.
Tri-County Electric says its damages will be about $500,000. Oahe Electric tabs the loss at $400,000. For many residents of central South Dakota, it may be several more days before power is back on.
Another day and more floodwaters rising across the Sioux Empire. The places coping with the inundation are too numerous to count, and it's beginning to look like the days that began that disastrous series of floods in the spring and summer of 1993. Ted Coppy visited Brookings County today to see how additional rain is sparking a whole new round of flood worries.
Under normal conditions, you can barely see the Big Sioux River from this hill south of Brookings. Today, water is about all you see. Most streams, lakes, and rivers in Brookings County were expected to crest sometime last night, but then today it started raining again, virtually non-stop. And for many, flooding here has become more than a typical springtime nuisance.
Okay, you've got an emergency. Take care of it.
Jack Otta owns a farm near Sinai. One look at his yard tells the story. He can't get to most of his buildings anymore. They've been swallowed up by Lake Sinai, which normally spans about 640 acres. Today, the lake has swollen to 3 times that size, and Jack's farm is going under. Otta says Lake Sinai has actually been rising for the last 10 or 15 years. In 1993, the farm flooded so badly that he and his family moved out. But this spring, says Jack, is the fastest he's seen the water encroach on his house.
I use it as an office, my farm, and do some research plots. So I think this is about the last week, though. I think everything's going to go. I think the basement will fill up after this, and it just isn't going to be livable anymore, I don't think.
Just down the road, indifferent floodwaters threaten to make the town of Sinai less livable. City workers are hauling rock and dirt around the municipal sewage pond, trying to keep rising waters off the electric panel, controlling their sewage pump and lift station. If it goes under, sewage will back up into homes here. Even driving in Brookings County has become difficult.
We've got several township roads that are closed with water over them. We've got a couple county roads that are closed because of water. We have several that have water on them, but we do keep them open for minimal travel.
And if the rain continues, minimal travel, even on major highways like US 14, won't be possible until the weather dries out. In Brookings County, Ted Coppy, KDLT News.
It hasn't taken Mother Nature too long to put the 1994 Federal Crop Insurance Reform Act to its first test. Widespread flooding throughout most of the Farm Belt in 1993 prompted Congress to do away with disaster payments, leaving instead beefed up crop insurance and deficiency programs. The deadline for farmers to qualify for this year's farm program is 1 week from tomorrow. If producers haven't purchased private or federal crop insurance by that time, they will not qualify. An estimated 1,500 rain-soaked farmers in Minnehaha County are expected to be in this year's program, but they won't be looking at the kind of help they received following the disaster of '93. Most of that year's crop was in the field and growing when it was washed away. The inability to put the planter in the fields this season makes next Friday's farm program deadline all the more important.
There is provisions if they don't get anything planted. There is a couple options. They can go, if they're signed up in the program, they can go the 092 program and receive their deficiency payment, which is not a lot of money, but they can get deficiency payment on that 092. And there would also be a small federal crop insurance payment. But you're talking not a lot of money. Bare essentials probably by participating in both the minimum federal crop and the 092.
Producers who meet next Friday's deadline will have until June 30th to change their mind and cancel out of the program. And we're all hoping
them out on his direct examination rather than leave Dennis Fung hanging in the wind for Barry Scheck to show up. So what they're doing here is they're saying, yes, some mistakes were made. They weren't big mistakes. Let me tell you about them. But let me tell you about all the good things that we did, too.
We're still in the very early stages of cross-examination of Andrea Mazzola. Do you expect that it will heat up to the extent that it did with Dennis Fung?
Well, you know, I don't think that Peter Neufeld is a Barry Scheck. And what I don't mean by that is I'm not trying to say that he is any less of a cross-examiner, but I don't think he is of that same kind of aggressive style. The other problem you have here is I think that Ms. Mazzola is a much more sympathetic witness than perhaps Dennis Fung was. Dennis Fung was the senior criminologist. He came on with sort of an air. I was the person in charge. and in many ways he was fair game. She is the criminologist one. I think that there is a sense, it would be a very thin line to good cross-examination and crossing that line into beating her up, and I think that's one thing the defense has to be very careful of.
The prosecution spent a little more than half a day on direct examination. They spent a day with Dennis Fung, and then we saw some 8 days of cross-examination that followed. How long would you anticipate this witness will be under cross-examination, or is that impossible to guess?
It's impossible, but let me just make a good educated guess. I think it should be sufficiently less time than we saw with Dennis Fung. They've wrung this area pretty much dry, and I think that to just go on and hammer her day after day, I think would be a big mistake for the defense. I just don't think they'll do it.
Do you get a sense that either side would be changing strategy at this point in the trial based on what they've seen so far and the manner in which the jury appears to be accepting the various testimonies of these witnesses?
The only strategy that I see different is the strategy of the prosecution in anticipating some of the problems that the criminalists had and bringing them out with Miss Mazzola rather than not bringing them out, which they did with Mr. Fung, and we all know what happened with him, what Mr. Scheck did with him. So I think this time they are saying, in a sense, they are admitting there were problems, they're bringing them up on direct examination, and they're saying, look, this is what they are, and in some way trying to diffuse that intense cross-examination that Mr. Fung went through.
Are you
out now where all those floors are pancaked? We just barely cut into it, found a couple more fatalities there, so that tally tonight will go up dramatically. And however, we do believe now that we only have about 150 people unaccounted for, when early on we had reports of about 200. That's refreshing. It'd be nice if we'd find those people outside that building somewhere, but the realism is starting to set in for all of us, including our emergency workers, and it's more of a morgue scene down there tonight than it is anything else.
You're expecting then another 150 in addition to the 41 that you've seen already, is that?
Well, we have an unofficial estimate of about 150 missing, and hopefully some of those people may have been elsewhere at the time of the explosion. That count, of course, unfortunately is going to go up. Our emergency service workers are still in there. They're still trying to focus on survivors, pockets in the building that we may have some people in, but they still don't want to come out. They're still dedicated to the job, but their mood has changed a little bit, and we're moving them out a little bit quicker than we used to, and trying to encourage them and pump them up a little bit.
It's been 26 hours now since you brought out somebody alive. This has to be very difficult for them in there in the rubble, moving things, seeing dead people, and not hearing anybody cry out.
It is frustrating, but they're all professionals, the men and women we have in that building right now, and they're going to do the very best job they can, and we're still going to approach it like we've got survivors in that building.
But at this point, are you also going to then start bringing out more bodies than you were earlier on when there were perhaps higher hopes of survivors?
Well, we're in a position right now where we're going to need to do some body removal in order to get to other areas of the building. And before we weren't able to do that, but in the next day or two, we're going to have to start doing some of that.
Well, Chief, thank you again for joining us very much. We appreciate it. So as you hear, the death toll is now officially 41, but overnight they're expecting to bring out, at one point there are 12 bodies in one location, a few others found down in the pancaked area. The death toll is certainly going to be rising. I'm Bonnie Anderson reporting live from Oklahoma City.
Bonnie, thank you. We have much more on the Oklahoma bombing coming up for you on Newsnight. Please stay with us.
I heard this boom and wind blowing, and I thought the computer had blown up.
It just explodes. You just watch your own room just go to pieces.
All of a sudden there was a loud bang, and everything went dark.
President Clinton has ordered U.S. flags at federal facilities to be flown at half-staff in remembrance of the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing. And the president is considering a trip to Oklahoma on Sunday to attend a memorial service. We go now to Frank Sesno for the latest from Washington. Frank?
Well, thanks, Kathleen. Here in Washington, it will be another very long night for many federal authorities working hard to find out who carried out the Oklahoma City bombing. For those responsible, the president says you can run, but you cannot hide. Senior White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer reports.
Officials say they're still not ruling out some sort of Middle East terror connection to the Oklahoma City truck bombing. This despite indications the two wanted suspects are described as white and apparently spoke with American accents. One source says the suspects may have been hired by others to rent the truck. Officials also are playing down the likelihood that a potential witness brought back to Washington from London will have much to offer investigators, though they're insisting there were good reasons for bringing him back. President Clinton, meanwhile, makes this flat pledge: those responsible will be arrested.
Whoever did it, we will find out, and there will be justice that will be swift and certain and severe. And there is no place to hide. Nobody can hide any place in this country, nobody can hide any place in this world from the terrible consequences of what have been done.
Mr. Clinton warns against jumping to conclusions about possible links to international terror groups, but hints there may be some.
This was an attack on innocent children, on innocent victims, on the people there in Oklahoma City. But make no mistake about it, this was an attack on the United States, our way of life, and everything we believe in. So whoever did it, we'll get to the bottom of it, and then we'll take the appropriate action.
In this case, Mr. Clinton says that could include the death penalty, as first suggested by Attorney General Janet Reno.
If this isn't an appropriate case for it, I don't think there ever would be one. And I strongly support what she said.
He ordered flags flown at half-staff till Monday, and he's expected to visit Oklahoma City Sunday to attend a memorial service. Several sources have suggested a possible motive for the bombing, revenge against the U.S. government. But revenge for precisely what remains unclear. Wolf Blitzer, CNN, the White House.
Well, as Wolf Blitzer mentioned, also in Washington, a man being described as a potential witness by federal officials ended his long trip back to the United States after being stopped at London's Heathrow Airport by British officials. We get more on the FBI hunt now and the fate of the possible witness from CNN's Tony Collins.
The FBI moved quickly to hunt for two key suspects in the bombing and to question a third man described as a possible witness. The FBI issued arrest warrants for two white males it says rented a truck that carried the bomb. It asked anyone with information about them to call 1-800-905-1514. Authorities believe the two suspects rented a Ryder truck used in the bombing from this body shop in Junction City, Kansas.
Both of these men should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Citizens should not, therefore, attempt to take any action against these men.
Their names were not known, but the FBI did issue composite sketches of the two, both of medium height and build. One man was described as having a light brown crew cut. The other reportedly has a tattoo on his left arm. Attorney General Janet Reno offered an inducement for people to come forward with information.
The government is offering a reward of up to $2 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for the bombing in Oklahoma City.
Meanwhile, a Jordanian-American man detained in London arrived under escort at Dulles Airport outside Washington. Wanted as a possible witness, he was taken to an undisclosed location in Virginia for questioning. His luggage had gone on to Rome. Italian police seized the bags and searched them. One source said the luggage contained equipment that could be used to make an explosive device. Officials said the man lived in a modest home in Oklahoma City, where neighbors said they hardly knew him.
Although law enforcement officials say they are making progress, they hope the offer of a reward will help them achieve the breakthrough they need. They note that a similar reward led to the capture of the alleged mastermind of the World Trade Center bombing. Anthony Collins, CNN, at the Justice Department.
And still ahead on Newsnight, did U.S. intelligence agencies know in advance there might be a terrorist attack somewhere in the United States? We look at that question in an exclusive report coming up. Well, Well, joining me now is Thomas Strentz, a former FBI agent who has worked numerous terrorist incidents over the years. Mr. Strentz, thanks very much for coming in. First of all, as a lawman, what are the first questions that you were asking, and what are the first clues that you get based on what we've seen so far?
Well, my first question, of course, relates to the motive. And typically in a bombing, that comes when they make some sort of statement and claim responsibility and tell us why they did it. And I think it's very significant in this particular case that no one has claimed credit. And in the long run, I think that could be a very important consideration.
When you pose the question to yourself, who did it, once you get past the motive, you come up with a couple of different profiles that you try to put together.
Yes, you can make a very good case for a Middle Eastern group and a right-wing American group.
Make the cases.
Well, for the Middle Eastern group, they've done this sort of thing before. We had the World Trade Center. We've got the bombing of our embassy in the Middle East, in Beirut. They've used car bombs before. Not very good intelligence on the building because, quite frankly, at least in my experience, killing children is absolutely verboten.
That is not something even terrorists would want to do or would
they've
set
done
out
it in
to
the
do?
Middle East in attacking kibbutz, but in terms of specifically bombing, targeting children, no.
Where does the other part of your attention go?
Clearly to the right wing.
Homegrown right wing?
Yes, homegrown right wing, people who are upset about taxes, about alleged violations of their Second Amendment rights, and we're aware that ATF and
alcohol,
IRS,
tobacco, and firearms.
Yes.
Second Amendment rights you're referring to, pro-gun,
right to keep and bear
very
arms.
radical, yeah.
Very radical indeed. And both of these organizations were located in that building. The other thing that strikes me is the size of the bomb.
How's that?
The bombers I've interviewed have not been terrorist bombers. They've been involved in killing girlfriends, insurance fraud, that sort of thing. They've been first-time bombers, and their devices have been extremely large. They overkill, so to speak. And from what I see of this particular device, it looks like it was much, much larger than would have been required.
Would you come back for just a moment to the domestic side of this that you were speaking about a moment ago? Specifically, speak a little bit more about the sorts of groups that would be capable or inclined to such violence. We have not seen such a thing on American soil, at least not to this degree, to my knowledge.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Not to this degree. We've had fire bombings of abortion clinics. We've had kidnappings of doctors. We've had shootings of doctors. We've had armored car robberies, this sort of thing. And so this would be a dramatic step, a change for them. But looking at these two individuals that the FBI has identified,
the composite sketches,
the composite, they sure look like Americans to me. And the one fellow who has a swarthy complexion has a tattoo, and in my experience, that's very unusual with people from the Middle East.
What will the impact be of those composite sketches being out there?
I think those sketches plus the reward is going to put a lot of heat on this case for fellow members of this organization who I suspect are not taking credit because of the children who have died. They see this whole thing as a tremendous miscalculation. And these two fellows beginning to say, if I don't turn myself in, somebody in the group is going to kill me. And the group saying, we can get two birds with one stone. We turn these guys in, we can get some money, et cetera, et cetera.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was speaking with a federal law enforcement official earlier today who said something very similar to that, and that is that the effect of putting out these composite sketches actually might prompt these two individuals to turn themselves in. What you're saying is, by transmitting their identity to their larger group, they may then fear for their own safety?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because, again, because of the children. And
so why? The group would then want to presumably eliminate them or in some way...
Eliminate them or somehow say, this was not our idea, it was their idea, we have nothing to do with it. You know, they were members of our organization, but they went clearly beyond. They were rogue aspect, et cetera, to wash their hands of it, to try to salvage something from this calamity.
Help me with something. We in journalism try very hard to report the facts without stepping into speculation, but in point of fact, much of what we have right now is speculation. As a law enforcement official, someone who's been engaged in these sorts of investigations, and for our viewers who are trying to keep up with this and just determine the responsible from irresponsible, what do we know and where is the line between fact and speculation right now?
That's a good question, because there is clearly, outside of law enforcement, much more speculation than fact. The facts, as I said, could be interpreted to support an argument for Middle East or right wing.
We may only be seeing a very small part of this puzzle.
Absolutely.
In fact, certainly we are.
And what, in my own judgment, a problem I have is, as an American, I'm much more comfortable saying, well, this has got to be some foreign group, because an American would never do this. And so that's a bias that I've got to keep a lid on so I can remain objective.
The President himself said today that Americans needed to be very careful not to rush to stereotypes.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Does that affect law enforcement officials as they proceed with their work? Is there a bias among people who would be doing the investigation, not a quite ability to believe that Americans would do this to Americans?
Well, you can't say there's never a bias. You've got to work to overcome a bias. In fact, what we used to do, if in a case we began seeing that it certainly looks like this person did it, we would begin saying, well, okay, what dictates against that? Trying to play the devil's advocate to make sure we didn't get into a process that Janice calls groupthink, where you begin rejecting anything that doesn't support your basic premise.
Thomas Trench, thanks very much. We appreciate your time. And our coverage will continue.
Every second of every day, there are 3 new mouths in this world to feed. Hundreds of millions more by the year 2000. And the majority of them will be born in countries where malnutrition is already reaching alarming proportions. Right now, the world has the food and the resources to conquer hunger. But it won't happen as long as we continue to look the other way. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Remember the old saying, what goes around comes around? That's what happens when you recycle and buy recycled products. So next time you go shopping, look for recycled content in your products and packaging. To make recycling work, you've got to buy recycled. That's why businesses are taking the lead. Amoco Foam Products offer a line of foam insulation board made with a minimum of 50% recycled polystyrene, the green alternative for commercial and residential building professionals. Call 1-800-NRC-RECYCLE for a free shopper's guide to buying recycled products.
You can see that we mean business the moment you walk in. We've got so much more to offer than anywhere you've been. Office Max, taking it to the max.
Office Max. You'll save money and get the best name brands. Plus, you'll always pay the low price guaranteed. That's one reason why over 60 million people and businesses will shop Office Max this year.
Office Max, taking it. Office Max, to the max.
Someday, industry says they've cleaned up their act. Environmentalists still fear the worst. And now, Newt thinks he knows how to save the planet. Is this any way to celebrate Earth Day? CNN presents Sunday, 9 Eastern.
Two police officers are dead in New Jersey after a gun battle over a weapons search. 2 of the 3 officers at the scene were brothers. It remains uncertain if they were both killed. A 3rd officer was reported down inside the house. The gunman opened fire on the officers as they tried to serve a search warrant. The gunman is still barricaded inside.
There's more jury trouble in the O.J. Simpson trial. A 25-year-old African-American flight attendant told Judge Lance Ito privately she wants out. According to the transcript inadvertently released to the media, Judge Ito asked, "What's up?" The woman replied, "I would like to be released." Ito asked,
Why? She said, "From this, because I can't take it anymore." She explained that it was a combination of things during the 3 months the jury has been sequestered. She is still on the jury, but Judge Ito has removed 3 sheriff's deputies guarding the jurors. California has lost a round in federal court in its effort to dodge the new National Voter Registration Act. The law is commonly known as the Motor Voter Act because it requires, among other things, that voters be allowed to register at motor vehicle offices. An appeals court judge in San Francisco says the state must comply with a lower court order to implement the law. The state has argued that such federal mandates are unconstitutional.
President Clinton today welcomed Brazilian President Fernando Henrique Cardoso to the White House. Mr. Clinton praised Mr. Cardoso, who had promised reforms to open key parts of the Brazilian economy to U.S. investors. He said U.S.-Brazilian ties are growing closer every day.
LAPD Chief Willie Williams, Friday night on Larry King Live, 9 Eastern, only on CNN.
"50 years of the United Nations."
In its 50th anniversary year, the UN is commemorating its original figures. Among them was Eleanor Roosevelt, already an energetic First Lady of the United States. She embarked on an international career after her husband died in 1945. An early U.S. delegate to the UN, she was instrumental in framing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It is a declaration of basic principles of human rights and freedoms.
Mrs. Roosevelt retired from UN service in 1952, but was later brought back by President Kennedy. She maintained a firm influence in American and world affairs until her death at 78.
Both Sides, now at a new time, Sunday, 12:30 Eastern on CNN.
Let's recap for you now the latest on the Oklahoma City bombing. The official death toll now stands at 41. Rescue efforts are slow and painful because of the instability of the shattered building. An unknown number of children and adults is still in the rubble, and hope fades with each passing hour that any will be pulled alive from the wreckage. The barbarity of the crime has caused outrage all the way to the White House and prompted the government to offer a substantial reward.
Let me say again, those responsible will be brought to justice. They will be tried, convicted, and punished. We will never let the forces of inhumanity prevail in the United States.
The government is offering a reward of up to $2 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for the bombing in Oklahoma City. Although we have many hundreds of leads, we want to make sure that we have all relevant information that could lead to the conviction of all of those involved in this event.
A man who may hold crucial clues to the bombing is back on American soil at this hour. Federal agents whisked the Jordanian American back to the United States after he completed a Chicago to London flight. The Justice Department says he is a possible witness in the case. Sources say he left Oklahoma City yesterday with a final destination of Amman, Jordan. He was detained for questioning in Chicago and released, but his luggage went on without him. It reached Rome, where Italian officials say they found equipment that could be used in bomb making. American Airlines tells CNN the man's name is Abram Ahmad. His baggage ID tag lists his name as Abraham Ahmed. A difference in translation may explain the apparent discrepancy. His neighbors in Oklahoma City say he left with a large suitcase yesterday. They also say the FBI came to the house this morning and questioned 2 women who lived there with 2 small children. At the same time, an international dragnet has been cast for 2 suspects in the case.
I want to announce today that investigators have identified a vehicle that was used in connection with yesterday's attack on the federal building here in Oklahoma City. Further investigation has determined that 2 white males were associated with this vehicle. As a result, arrest warrants will be sought for these 2 males. I must point out to you, however, that their exact identities are not presently known. Thus, the arrest warrants that I am discussing will be for 2 men, each identified only as John Doe. The first man is of medium build. He is further described as being approximately 5'10" to 5'11", weighing approximately 180 to 185 pounds, with a light brown crew cut, and he is right-handed. The second man is also medium build. He's further described as 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighing approximately 175 to 80 pounds, with brown hair and a tattoo visible on his left arm below his t-shirt sleeve. He's possibly a smoker. Both of these men should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Citizens should not, therefore, attempt to take any action against these men. Anyone with information about these 2 men should provide it immediately to the nearest FBI office. They can also call phone banks that have been especially established to receive that information. We urge people with information to call 1-800-905-1514.
Those arrest warrants have been issued. We'll be back in a moment.
It may be called peace of mind, but people can see it all over your face. Now you can get that feeling of reassurance in a credit card. Introducing Bank AmeriCard Photo Card. Your picture and signature on the front make it harder for anyone else to use, even if it's lost or stolen, because of all the things we've added to make your Bank AmeriCard more attractive. We couldn't think of one more important than you. Banking on America. Bank of America. Visit your branch today.
Look what's popping up for spring. It's Sears Days, and you'll find many of our lowest prices of the season, but it only lasts 11 days. Come to Sears Days.
Open the gate from the comfort of your new Galant. Introducing the Mitsubishi HomeLink system, a new level of security and convenience available exclusively on one midsize sedan. Turn on the lights. Open the garage door. HomeLink. Imagine the possibilities. From Mitsubishi, the new thinking in automobiles.
It is said he is to computer software what Thomas Edison is to the light bulb. The software Bill Gates developed runs 2/3 of the computers in the world. And on the day he turned 36, his company, Microsoft, was bigger than Xerox, Kodak, and McDonald's. Where in today's world do you find companies capable of such astonishing growth? Actually, there's a list of them printed every day. NASDAQ, the stock market for the next 100 years.
What does your business get when combining breaking news with a Network 486 PC, CNN at Work? Get the competitive edge of being the first to know. Call 1-800-CNN-WORK. That's 1-800-CNN-WORK.
Good morning, I'm Joey Chad.
And I'm Ralph Windy.
Start your weekend with the latest news and information, live interviews, and your phone calls.
Next caller, you're on.
Everything you need to make the most of your Saturday morning, 7 to 10 Eastern on CNN.
Lesser acts of terrorism committed in the United States.
There were acts of violence that were carried out by some right-wing extremists in the Middle East.
In 1970, anti-war extremists bombed the University of Wisconsin Army Research Center, killing a researcher. The explosive used was a mixture of nitrogen fertilizer and fuel oil.
In 1975 at the LaGuardia Airport, 11 people were killed by a bomb that was set in a storage locker at that location.
A group calling itself the Puerto Rican Armed Resistance claims responsibility for a bomb which killed one person at New York's Kennedy Airport in 1981. In 1983, 2 leftist radicals bombed the U.S. Capitol to protest the U.S.-led invasion of Grenada. No one was hurt.
Regrettably, I suspect, whether it's 6 months from now, a year from now, or 2 years from now, I'm going to be sitting in a chair like this and answering the same questions about the next terrorist bombing.
Loretta Lepore, CNN, Atlanta.
Company.
Is called upon now to offer a prayer, but in my Jewish tradition, we arrive at prayer only first through study. We will confront and vanquish the angel of death with the weapon that is ours to use decisively if we choose. We will confront the angel of death with life.
Almighty God, thou who dost hear every audible word spoken by our lips, hearest thou also the silent moan from within us as we share the common grief and agony of having lost loved ones so unfairly.
I want to say thank you to you who have come to support the families that are so devastated, so stricken, as are we all in this community of Oklahoma City. We come together because we need one another. John Donne said so long ago, no man is an island, no man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me, and each man's grief is mine own. We need one another.
CNN's coverage continues throughout the day of the search for the bombers, the victims in Oklahoma City. During morning news in the next hour, a conversation with FEMA Director James Lee Witt. I'm Bob Kang.
Meanwhile, in Oklahoma City, the grim search for victims continues. No survivors were found today, only more bodies. So far, 62 people have been confirmed dead. More than 150 are still unaccounted for. And we'll bring you further updates as events warrant. I'm Bobby Batista.
And I'm Lyndon Soles. That's all for Prime News this Friday. Thanks for joining us. Crossfire is next.
LAPD Chief Willie Williams on tonight's Larry King Live, 9 Eastern, only on CNN.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to Tomorrow Today, where you'll find out how the latest information
is severe. We will find them,
we will convict them, and we will seek the death penalty for them.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley.
I'm Bob Beckel, sitting in for Mike Kinsley. 2 days after the deadly blast in Oklahoma City, it appears authorities have cracked the worst case of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Timothy McVeigh, arrested 90 minutes after the bombing, was flown back to Oklahoma City a short time ago for questioning. Another man, identified as Terry Lynn Nichols, surrendered to police in Harrington, Kansas, and is undergoing questioning there. Attorney General Reno says others were probably involved in the bombing, and this afternoon in rural Michigan, federal authorities surrounded and searched the home of Nichols' brother. Law enforcement sources have linked the men to the Michigan Militia, a right-wing extremist group that believes government was overstepped its power, especially when it comes to regulating guns. The leader of the group has disavowed any link with the men or any role in the Oklahoma bombing. Who are the people who make up the Michigan Militia and other fringe right-wing groups? And do they now pose a threat of homegrown domestic terrorism? Fred Barnes is sitting in for John Sununu tonight. Fred.
Let's first get an update from Wolf Blitzer at the White House. Wolf, what do we know about these guys, McVeigh and Nichols, and what their motives are?
Well, Fred, U.S. law enforcement authorities have a lot of information on these domestic terrorist groups, and they refer to them as terrorist groups. Some of these organizations are not very well known to the general public, but I am told that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have extensive information. Now, what they specifically have on John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2, we don't know yet, but we do know that a lot of that information, no doubt, is being collected and collated and absorbed even as we speak.
Well, do officials think that people like members of the Michigan Militia are a threat to the president himself?
The answer is yes. They think that a lot of these White Aryan Brotherhood, these extreme right-wing organizations do represent threats to the government in general and to the president in particular. In fact, over these months, long before this Oklahoma City bombing, we had been told by Secret Service sources that there were a lot of these threats that the Secret Service takes very seriously, coming from these fringe groups on the extreme right wing, and they take them very, very seriously.
Wolf, there's been reports tonight about subpoenas being issued in Arizona. Attorney General Reno said other people were probably involved. How much of a conspiracy do you get the sense this is? Do you expect there will be others involved in this? And how soon, if at all, will we see any more arrests?
Well, Janet Reno says there is a strong likelihood that there will be other suspects involved. She didn't use the word conspiracy, but they are working under that assumption. The simple fact is they simply don't know right now how extensive this alleged conspiracy may have been. They have a two-pronged approach, though. The focus is first and foremost to find the suspects involved in this particular case, but secondly, to make sure there are no additional bombings from others, copycats or sympathizers or whatever. So it's a serious problem for the U.S. government.
Wolf Blitzer at the White House, thank you very much. We're going to go now to Denver and speak to Kevin Flynn, a Rocky Mountain News reporter, also the co-author of a book, The Silent Brotherhood, which was a book about right-wing military extremist groups. Kevin, thanks for being on Crossfire. What can you tell us specifically about the Michigan Militia?
Well, the militia movement as a whole has grown out of the government crackdown in the mid-'80s of the more violent extremists. Militias as a whole don't tend to be very violent people, but they attract folks who can go off and freelance their own crimes. I have no reason to doubt the Michigan Militia when they say they don't know these people. They may be hangers-on, they may be followers, they may only attend meetings once in a while. But these militia movements in Michigan, in Montana, here in Colorado, in Pennsylvania, it's a very broad movement. It's much broader than the movement was in the 80s.
Kevin, talking about Montana, the Montana militia in a paper obtained today, their pamphlet, Taking Aim, said that they called on their members to look for action on April 19th, the date of the bombing in Oklahoma City. This pamphlet was out several weeks before the bombing. April 19th has a significance to the militia. Can you tell us what that is, besides Oklahoma City?
Yeah. Well, we know that April 19th, of course, was the second anniversary of the Waco, the culmination of the Waco siege, and what many in the militia movement believe is the murder of all those children and the Branch Davidian adults in Waco. It was also, coincidentally, the third anniversary of an aborted attempt to attack the survivalist in Idaho, Randy Weaver, who is the second cause célèbre, if you will, of the militia movement, the survivalist who refused to come out and whose wife and son were killed along with a federal marshal. April 19th, coincidentally, as we saw in the news, was the execution date of a white supremacist by the name of Richard Wayne Snell in Arkansas. I spoke with his lawyer this afternoon, and he said that Richard went to his death knowing of the bombing and that he, quote, was appalled by what had been done and would in no way condone that act.
Let me turn to Victoria Tunsing, who is a former Assistant Attorney General who created the anti-terrorism unit at the Justice Department. I had always heard, Victoria, that the FBI was on top of these paramilitary groups, had infiltrated them. Given that, how could a bombing like this happen? I mean, there must have been a lot of activity associated with it.
Well, not necessarily. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people could have put this together, Fred. The FBI really has done an excellent job of investigation. We are so good at investigating. We are not too great at preventing, and that's because we have a free society, and there are all kinds of protections. There's an outgrowth of the anti-war movement in the 1960s and 70s. There are now lots of guidelines and prohibitions on the FBI as far as infiltrating certain groups who are just expressing their First Amendment rights.
Would you recommend that these inhibitions on the FBI be lifted?
Not, of course not entirely. I think there's always time for a discussion to see where something is falling through the cracks and evaluating it. I hate to do it, though, whenever we have some kind of incident like this. Wouldn't it be nice to do it with quiet reflection?
But that may not work. That's the problem.
Let me go back here for a second, because I want to follow up on something that Kevin Flynn mentioned. Kevin, you said that when Richard Snell went to his death a few days ago, he said he knew of the bombing and was appalled. Now, do you mean that you think he had, or his attorney thinks he had, prior knowledge to this? Does that raise then the question, or if not, do you think this was a conspiracy involving other militia groups in other states, or do you think it's possible these two people, if in fact, and this is alleged now, and we don't know, in fact, whether they really were members of the Michigan militia. Right, we should keep that in mind. But do you think that if this is a militia movement activity, that this is an isolated incident or a conspiracy?
I think it's isolated in the sense that the militia in general won't be going out and taking these actions as an organized group, but there will be people around the edges who want to take it further, and that's exactly what happened in the mid-'80s. If I could jump on that other point, in the 80s, infiltration by the federal government did lead to prevention. There were bombings in Seattle that were forestalled because groups had been infiltrated. Now the rules have changed a little bit, and as I mentioned before, the groups are broader now, and it's harder to keep tabs on everybody who's involved in this.
Well, Kevin, let me follow with this then. How broad is broad? How many people do you think in the United States are actively involved in the militia movement, either defensively or offensively?
Well, you know, they don't
thousands?
give out numbers. No, definitely thousands, probably in the low tens of thousands, something on the... I've seen estimates in the order of 20,000 people.
But that doesn't matter. I mean, what we're talking about here is we have a criminal conspiracy going on, and a conspiracy doesn't have to be very broad. All it has to be is 2 persons to become a criminal conspiracy, and we have allegations that we have at least that many people. We don't know if they're the exact people that are arrested yet.
Yeah, but these are paramilitary groups. What do you think about the number? Kevin Flynn said maybe 10,000 or more. Are there that many?
There could be. I mean, who knows who calls himself
a
I was hoping
you and the FBI might know.
Well, the FBI might know, but Kevin doesn't know. There's not a membership list. That's the whole problem. That's the issue, Fred.
Most of these people are not going to give you problems. Most of these people are going to obey the law. They believe in the rule of law, and they think that the United States is losing that battle, and they're losing those freedoms. Most of those people will not go out and commit these kinds of crimes. That's what drives people out of the group and has them doing these kinds of acts.
This is what terrorism groups do. I mean, how do we talk about them? We're talking about them on the fringe, aren't we? So we have terrorists that are part of religious organizations. The religious organization would never consider any kind of violence, but it's the fringe people who are doing it.
Okay, when we repeat one more time, though, again, there's no yet firm evidence that the militia movement in any way was involved with this, or the militia from Michigan specifically. Fred?
Well, we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Russ Ballant, who is an expert on the Michigan militia.
Their information, quite frankly, that they had was that there may have been some destructive devices there. That's why the intensity, that's why we had the overcautiousness. You saw, all of you, from the choppers and your cohorts, the number of people that were there.
certainly that was due to precautionary measurements regarding information that there could have been.
Of the bombing suspects, a second man who resembles the other composite drawing suspect turned himself in, but at this point has not been arrested. The second man's brother has been questioned, but he too is not accused of anything. In the O.J. Simpson case, no testimony today and none till Tuesday. Instead, jurors are being questioned privately. They're upset about guards being replaced. Crossfire continues after this.
Nothing could stop former NBA star Johnny Moore, except a deadly infection. Doctors said he'd go blind, never have kids, possibly die.
Of our findings are preliminary. We have a long way to go to complete the final resolution.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Our subject, the arrest of one Michigan militia member and the interrogation of two others in the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Their detention has put the spotlight on extremist paramilitary groups across America. Joining us from Detroit is writer Russ Bellant, an expert on the Michigan militia from Eastern Michigan University. From Denver, Kevin Flynn, a Rocky Mountain News reporter and author of The Secret Brotherhood, and Victoria Tunsing, who created the Justice Department's Anti-Terrorism Unit. Bob?
Okay, let me ask you right away, Russ Bellant. Both Terry Lynn Nichols and Timothy McVeigh have been identified by only sources as being members of the Michigan militia. Have you ever heard of these two people, and do you have any information that they were in fact members?
I haven't heard of them, and I don't have any information to that effect. And I'd be a little surprised if they were members. The Michigan militia itself denies any knowledge of these individuals, and given the nature of the Michigan militia, I tend to believe that.
Okay, and you say the nature of them. You've been in their meetings, you've followed them. Tell us about them.
Well, the Michigan militia is a public organization. They seek to recruit people openly through forums, through explaining their views, and any activity that would be of an underground or paramilitary nature would be left to other groups. They have contact with underground groups, but I think that the public nature of their organization would discourage people who are going to do the kind of heinous acts that were committed in Oklahoma from participating.
Russ, am I wrong, or do they not call themselves, don't they have a chain of command? They have lieutenants, they have a colonel, they have 4 different areas of the state. They go out on paramilitary exercises? I mean,
That's right.
I don't know whether you want to call that a civic group. In my neighborhood, that ain't a civic group.
I didn't mean to imply that they're a civic group. They're a paramilitary group. They're public in that their activities are public. You can attend them. And I would be surprised if somebody who was going to do this kind of act would be showing up in public meetings. That's all I meant to say. But there are other underground militia groups in Michigan. The Michigan militia is the name of a specific organization.
And Russ, I want to ask you, and then Kevin Flynn, whether this may be true, that these paramilitary groups who claim to be defensive are now turning to offense. What about it?
Well, they have stated in manuals and in other places that they are preparing for a military confrontation with the government. They believe that the system is unremittingly evil, needs to be challenged, and that they need to build a military force to do it. And so I think it was only a matter of time. I wasn't surprised that this kind of action occurred, that the symbolism of Waco, and I think there's more to come.
Kevin, what about it? Are they going on offense?
Well, it is precisely because the overall structure, the overall public groups advertise themselves as defensive in nature that the people who desire more action and more direct conflict leave them and do other things or never join them in full-fledged membership. It's precisely for that reason, because they are defensive in nature.
But it would seem that these are the very kinds of groups that the FBI could easily infiltrate if they're meeting in public and they have, I don't know how the membership is acquired, maybe they even have a roster and you sign up and pay $5 a year or whatever. I mean,
well, I think the fact that they've been targeted so quickly by the investigators, I think, is evidence that they have been infiltrated to a degree. It's very direct evidence. Within 48 hours, you have this action.
Well, but let me bring Russ Bellant back in. Russ, these people, one of their big arguments is gun control, right? That they say the Brady Bill and doing away with semi-automatic weapons. And yet these are the same people that take these weapons into the woods expecting a confrontation. Why in the world, then, would that make a good case for doing away with gun control? I mean, I think after the American people see these people marching around there, their big issue is doing away with gun control laws. I think it's a good case for keeping gun control laws.
Well, it seems so, and their acquisition of lethal weapons, they justify not only the weapons that were banned, but weapons well beyond that. The arsenals that have been created, and these militias, of course, have been around for many years. The Michigan militia and some other recent ones around the country have gained publicity recently.
Well,
but
when you say
30 years of these groups.
Russ, when you say building up arsenals, we're talking thousands of weapons. We're talking about automatic weapons, and as I understand, in some cases, mortars. Is that right?
That's right.
And they sweet crowd.
Let me ask Victoria Tunsing about who is at risk from these groups. Do you think the president's threatened?
Well, of course, if you've got a paramilitary organization that's upset with the government, that's just a breeding ground for somebody who's going to go off the edge. Whether, I don't care if it's right wing or left wing. I mean,
Sure.
it doesn't matter.
Well, the president jogs every day. Should he stop that? He jogs in public. I see him.
Yeah, but none of us, as soon as we all stop changing our behavior to that degree, then all of these people have won, haven't they? Because they've taken away our basic liberties.
You know, there's a novel by one of these paramilitary guys in West Virginia about a car bomb or truck bomb blowing up the FBI building on Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, I drive down Pennsylvania Avenue practically every day. A truck bomb could easily get close to that building.
Actually, that building was constructed so that it was bomb-proof.
Okay, yeah, I don't want you to lose sleep tonight, but let me go back and ask Kevin Flynn a question. Kevin, this was a very big bomb. Now they're talking about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. Let's assume these two people are ultimately linked to this and they are arraigned on these charges. Do you believe it's possible that they could have committed this crime alone, or do you think that there might have been a conspiracy of individuals who may have shared their view, whether they were militia or not?
It's not likely that they did it alone, but I would say that it is very likely that they did it with a much smaller network than we might imagine. One of the lessons from the militant action we had in the 1980s, the armored car robberies, the assassination of the Jewish talk show host here in